Hi, Claire and James here. Just before we get stuck into this week's episode, we wanted to let you know the exciting news that the Midlife Reset audit is now live. This is a first of its kind personalised diagnostic tool designed for midlifers by midlifers.
In just 3 minutes, the audit will help you pinpoint what's really holding you back from living your healthiest, happiest midlife, and most importantly, provide tailored strategies on how to take back control. Midlife doesn't have to be a time of uncertainty. It can be an era of growth, discovery, and well-being. So to go ahead and take the audit, go to themidlifementors.com/audit.
Being a parent isn't easy, and being a modern father carries its own set of challenges. Larry Hagner spent half his childhood without a father figure in his life, and the other half with toxic father figures that came and went. He made one decision as a young boy, and it was that his kids would know who their father was. Larry knew firsthand the devastating effects of growing up without a positive father figure in his life, and used this to create the Dad Edge community. Larry is now a podcaster, best-selling author, and runs programs for men to step up and be the best that they can be as a partner, a parent, and a man. Talking to Larry was truly inspiring. I'm sure this episode will resonate with many of you. Hi, I'm James Davis.
And I'm Claire Davis.
We're the Midlife Mentors, here to lift the lid on how to achieve health and happiness.
The balanced, no-nonsense way.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Midlife Mentors podcast with me, James, and today I am flying solo. We're recording this in August, in spite of it being summer. Claire has actually come down with some sort of cold flu type thing, so she's in her sick bed. So I am holding the show today, but not on my own, because I have a very special guest. I'm joined today by Larry Hagner of the Dad Edge. Now, the mission of the Dad Edge is to empower men to live and lead legendary lives. It empowers men to create legendary marriages, create epic connections with their kids, master personal finances, optimize their health, and become a leader within their family. Larry, welcome.
What is going on? Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about doing this show, man. And I love the title of it.
Oh, it's so great to have you on. You know, I think it's really going to resonate with our listeners for sure. Can you tell us a little bit about the Dad Edge? Like, what inspired you to create this platform? It's like a multi-platform offering now, isn't it? You've got a podcast, you've got community, you've got programs. How did it all come about?
Oh man, I wish I could say it came about with, like a beautiful epiphany one day, where like you're just like, oh, I meant to do this. It came from such a dark place, and it came from such struggle. My backstory, I mean, if I'm being really honest, it really probably started and sparked with my own childhood experience with men coming in and out of my life. My mom and biological father were married really young. They were about 21, and they were married in 1971. And then they got divorced about 4 years later, and that's when I was born. They got divorced about 9 months after I was born. I was born in 1975. And my dad left after that. I have no recollection of him whatsoever. I don't remember him being in my life. And I remember being 4 years old, and I remember being in preschool. And that's when I really understood what a dad was, because men were coming to pick up their kids from daycare. So like I understood what a dad was, and I knew that we didn't have one. It was just me and my mom. And I was totally fine with that. Like it didn't bother me. Like I actually thought that moms go out and find dads, and they just come along later, like whenever they're found. So like I just thought my mom hadn't found mine yet, and that was fine. But I'll never forget my mom telling me one time when I was 4. I mean, I'm 49 years old. It was 45 years ago. And I remember this vividly to this day. My mom came up to me. It was a Friday, and she's like, hey, I'm having a really good friend of mine over for dinner tonight. He's a very special friend, and I've been friends with him for about 4 or 5 months now. And I work with him, and I'd really like for you to meet him. He's coming over for dinner tonight. And in my mind, I was like, oh my God, she did it. She found the dad. This is the dad. And like, but that was her way of like, I've been dating somebody at work, and it's time for you to meet him. Right. So I'll never forget like this guy walking in, and I never said anything out loud to my mom about what my thought process was. And this guy walks in my house, and it was the first time like a man walked in my house that I remember. And he was wearing like a trench coat. He was wearing a 3-piece suit. He had a double Windsor tie. He had a briefcase and a mustache and feathered hair. And he was a white collar data software engineer. And this guy walks in and I was just like, whoa, like that's a man, like that's a dad, right? And literally I shook his hand and the first question out of my 4-year-old mouth as I'm beaming looking up at this guy saying, "Are you going to be my dad?" And I just remember, I think my mom like even gasped. She was like, and like he just like awkwardly laughed. But I think my mom kind of took that like as a Jerry Maguire moment, like where the little kid like hugs Tom Cruise and she's like, oh my God, like this is the guy, right? And my mom married him like 6 months later. And I think on paper, she like was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. Like my son loves this man. And yeah, I can live with them. I don't think my mom ever really loved him. I think she just loved the idea of bringing a family together. And it was good for like a year. And then after that, it was 6 years of hell. My stepdad drank a lot, and my mom and him fought a lot. He was very abusive when he drank. I mean, dude, there were times where cops were called to my house because there was so much screaming going on. He drugged me, he choked me, he hit me, he threw me. Like it was horrible. But to be honest, like I really didn't think much of it at that age because like it was, I don't want to say it was the norm, but I didn't know any better. And I thought that was normal. And then they got divorced when I was 10. He was out, gone. I've never seen him since. Actually, I found out about 10 years ago he died. And it was kind of crazy. So like I started asking a lot of questions when I was a kid and like, hey, wait a second. Like this guy came into my life at 4. Like, where did I come from? My mom never told me she was married before. And I started asking questions. And that's when she laid it on me. She's like, I was actually married before your dad. And I was like, because that was the only dad I knew.
Hmm.
And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah. She goes, you have that. And he's your dad. And like the man that I was married to. So she told me his name. And 2 years later, I'm 12 years old and I accidentally run into him. Had no idea, but he lived 3 miles from our house. I won't, for the sake of time, I won't go into the detail of how we ran into each other because it's a long story, but we did.
Hmm.
And, I was 12. My dad lived 3 miles from us. He was remarried at the time, had a 2-year-old son. He had another one on the way. He was a business owner. And I was ecstatic. I was so ecstatic. My dad was in my life. Like, and he hung out with me like every week. Like he would come to my little league baseball games, my little league basketball games, even though I sucked as an athlete, he still came and we spent time together. And about 4 or 5 months went into our relationship. I started to notice just different energy in him. Like he seemed overwhelmed, stressed, kind of strained, like cold, distant. And finally, one day I just picked up the phone and I was like, hey, what's going on? Like, I just kind of get this feeling. I don't really know. Like, and I don't remember the words that were said. I really don't. All I remember was that was the end of our relationship. And I think it was more like, hey, it's me, it's not you. I can't really do this. This is a lot. And he left. And that really threw me into a spiral as a kid. I started to really overeat as a kid, emotionally overeat. I was picked on. I was bullied. I got really fat. I failed the 8th grade. I actually had to do 8th grade twice. But that was a turning point. I went on to high school. My mom continued to date. She even got married again when I was 18. But every freaking guy, man, every guy was the same guy, just different face, different names, just a partier, an abuser, reckless. A guy who would get drunk all the time. It was absurd. And then I went away to college, met my college sweetheart, got into a really lucrative career in medical surgical device sales, and everything on the outside looked great. And so I'm 30 years old. I've been married for 2 years. I have my first son on the way. I'm in a Starbucks for a business meeting, and I had a couple of coworkers with me, and one of the coworkers with me was a very good friend of mine. She and I spent time together outside of work. She was married. Me and my wife and her and her husband, all 4 of us were really good friends. We spent a lot of time together. So she knew my story. And I'm sitting in that Starbucks and she was one of the coworkers with me. And I look up and I notice a guy walk in. I'm like, oh, that's my dad. Like I hadn't seen him in 18 years. And he came walking in for a morning coffee. And I was like, oh my God, I know who that guy is. And the girl who I worked with saw this look on my face and she's like, are you okay? You look like you're just seeing a ghost. And I'm like, I looked at her. I was like, "You're not gonna believe this." I was like, "My father just walked in here." She's like, "Oh my God!" Like, and her first question was, "Which one?" And I said, "My biological father, my real father." She's like, "The one you haven't seen since you were 12?" I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "Where is he?" And I was like, "Right over there." And she's like, "What are you gonna do?" I was like, "Nothing. Finish this meeting, She's like, well, wait, you're not going to go over and talk to him? I was like, no, why would I? Like the guy walked out on me twice in my life. Like he's not worth my time. Well, she just took it upon herself to just walk over there and go over to him and sit down at his table. And I was like, what is about to happen? So I'm watching them talk and I'm like, what is she saying? Like, what do I do? I thought about like, do I just leave? Like, do I actually walk out of here and like hit him on the way out? Like, I had so many mixed emotions. And all of a sudden, like, I saw him start scanning the room, and then he saw me and I saw him, and then he got up and he walked over. And I could tell it was humbling for him. And he extended his hand. He's like, hey, he's like, man, how are you doing? And I'm like, fine. How are you? Like, I wasn't nice, but I wasn't a total jerk, but I was like very indifferent. And he's like, man, he's like, what are you doing like these days? He looked at my ring. He's like, are you married? I was like, yeah. And he goes, well, you have kids? I was like, I have my first one on the way. And he's like, oh man. He's like, well, what are you doing these days? And I told him, and he's like, we should really get together. And I'm like, you really don't have to do this. And he's like, do what? And I was like, you don't have to do this. I was like, we're good. And he's like, no. I want to. And I'm like, well, here's my card. Cause this was 2005. So we didn't have smartphones yet. I was like, here's my card. If you want to get a hold of me, here's the way. And I didn't think I'd ever hear from him. Well, 2 days later pass and I get this long email. And the guy just poured his heart out. Like certain things, like worst mistake I ever made. If I could do the past 30 years all over again, I'd do things differently now that I'm older. He's still married to this day, the same woman. I have 2 younger half brothers, but that turned into what has now been 19 years of our relationship. So we have a friendship now. We have a relationship. He's still married to the same woman, 45 plus years. I have 2 younger half brothers. My youngest brother and I get along unbelievably well. But that was my childhood. But Dad Edge got started because I'll be very honest, I was terrified to get married. I was terrified to have kids. All I saw was things that failed when it came to relationships like that. And I certainly had no clue what to do. And I was bound and determined though, I'm gonna make this marriage work. I'm gonna be a good husband. I'm gonna be a good dad. And I'm never gonna hit my kids out of anger. And I broke all 3 of those promises. And it really came to a head when my 16-year-old was 4. So 14 years ago, Dad Edge got started because I broke that 3rd promise that I would never strike my children out of anger. My son was 4. He stepped out of line and I just reacted and I spanked him. And unfortunately, I spanked him so hard that he fell by my hand. And he toppled down. I was like, oh my God, what the hell did I just do? Like I knew immediately, like it was burning in me. Like, what did I just do? And I went down. This is what kills me though. It gets worse. I go down to pick him up. Like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And he rolls over and he looks at me and he puts his hands up and closes his eyes. Like, please don't hurt me. And I was like, I'll be honest with you, man. I've told this story probably 1,000 times. I can never burn that image out of my head.
Yeah.
Seeing my son terrified of me. And I never hit him up to that day, and I have never hit him since. But that was it. That was my wake-up call. I was like, this has got to change. And the thing that has to change is me. I've got to set aside this ego, and I've got to learn how to do this because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. No clue. And I made a commitment that day. I'm like, I'm just going to go out and learn something new every day. As a husband, as a father, as a man. Like I invest all this time into my career, learning there. I did martial arts at the time. I invest all this time to learn martial arts. Why am I not investing in that? I've been doing nothing. And that was the journey. And that's been the journey for 14 years. And that's still the journey. Still learning every single day, every single podcast that I do, 1,200 episodes under my belt with Dad Edge. And I will never, ever, ever, ever stop learning, ever, because that is the catalyst for fulfilling life, for fulfilling relationships, is to constantly be curious, to constantly learn, to constantly grow, to constantly challenge myself, and to do this thing the best I know how. So at the end of my life, I know that I left nothing on the table in those areas, period. So that's how Dad Edge got started. I know it's not pretty, but that was it.
Wow, I love that. I love your attitude as well towards, continual growth. And I think that's so important. And I think as men, I think we've got a role to really step up for that. So, Claire and I, we've been going to couples therapy for a while now. And not there's anything wrong in the relationship, but we just want the relationship to be better. We want to relate to each other better. It's about, like you say, being brave enough to take up those things that might feel frightening to us, to be prepared to grow and to be better. And I want to say, what an inspiring story, because like that wasn't a great start for you in life. You didn't have great role models around, and clearly that imprinted on you. And it could have gone the other way, but you've turned it around into something so positive for yourself and your own relationship, but obviously for so many other men that now follow you and can learn from you. I was going to ask, do you think fatherhood is tougher now than maybe it was 30, 40 years ago when we had a more defined idea of like the classic nuclear family where, the men went to work in a steady job, the woman was more the homemaker or maybe had a part-time job. And now the roles are a lot more fluid. And we've got lots of societal things happening. Do you think it's tougher now?
So I think that's I'll answer that two different ways. Do I think it's tougher now? Yes. Do I think it's easier now? Yes. And I'll explain what I'm talking about. So do I think it's tougher now? Yes. Let me explain that one first, and I'll just give you my theories on this. We're raising a digital generation right now. One with smartphones, right? One with a window to the world, right? You and I are the first generation of fathers to raise a generation with a window to the world. That's tough because that's new to us. I mean, smartphones have only been around since 2007. So it's not even 20 years. It's not even 2 decades, right? And, so we're raising this generation of how they communicate differently now. I mean, 40% of, I'm sorry, 60% of communication with kids is through a device. That's crazy to me, right? Think about that. The kids playing video games online, or they're communicating via text or Snapchat or whatever else. So like, and if you really look at this generation, conversation is tough for them. My youngest brother is 12 years younger than me, and I can even sense it in him because, he was still in high school when smartphones came around. And I can even sense it in him that sometimes conversation is tough. I mean, he's older now, so he's out of that, but I noticed in his 20s it was tough for him. And I've noticed that with a lot of like millennials. So I think the digital thing is tough. I also think that this is new ground for fathers because if you really think about it, I mean, you said it beautifully, which is, when our dads were raising us and then their dads were raising them, like my grandpa. I mean, I think that my grandfather's generation, those were like the toughest dudes on the planet. Like if you were born in between the years of, 1915 and 1925, I mean, you experienced some serious stuff like world wars and Vietnam and the Great Depression. And, there was a lot of things that those dudes lived through. And I think that they raised their sons and daughters tough, right? And they did. So like I think our generation of dads, like that was the grit that they were raised with. And they kind of raised us with that too. Like it was very gritty. I remember, even though I had like these yahoos for father figures, they were still tough, especially my dad who adopted me from when he was around from 4 to 10. Like he had no tolerance for poor manners or not being polite or pleased or thank you or anything. Like he was hard on me. But I appreciate that too. But I think hit the roles of our fathers and then the grandparents were like, we're the providers. We work all day. Like I still remember like going over to friends' houses and it was not out of the ordinary whatsoever for the mom to be home. And then when the dad got home, he'd just chill out on the couch for a while. Like one of my best friends, his dad did that every night, but it was not out of the ordinary. But I think the tough thing now to answer your question, what makes it tough now is we have a generation of men now, which I really, really admire that their attitude is like, not on my watch. I want more. I want to be connected with my kids. I really want to be a part of their life. I want to have conversations with them. Like I want this relationship different. But the tough part is I don't know what that looks like and I don't know how to create that. Do I think let me answer the part where it's easier. Do I think it's easier now? Like if you look when I started Dad Edge, I started searching for resources for parenting, for manhood, for fatherhood, and there wasn't a whole lot out there. There was a lot of stuff for moms. that's what I found. I was like, man, there's a plethora of communities and resources for moms, but there's not a whole lot for dads. And that's when I was like, I'm going to create it. I don't even know what it looks like. I'm going to create it. And what I'll tell you is the reason I think it's easier now is because there's so many resources now. All you need is a click of a button, or to, like, we have the Dad Edge Alliance, which is our mastermind. Like, you want to come and sit in the quote unquote classroom of learning how to be a better dad, husband, father, man. Whew, man, we got that nailed. Right? And I'll say that with all confidence. We've been doing it for 8 years. We had to go through a lot of practice, but we got it nailed now. But I'll tell you is, like, if you really want to go learn how to do this, oh, there's no better time. Like, literally all you need is a phone and you got it. Like, you can go watch YouTube videos. You can go buy a course. You can go join a mastermind. Like, all you need is a device and you can learn how to do this.
That's a great answer, and I love it. It's so interesting, isn't it? We're reflecting on 2007 being this pivotal year, because I think it's the smartphones came out, or at least the iPhone. I think it's also when Facebook kind of hit critical mass. So you got these two things that have changed our world so much in such a relatively short space of time. Do you want to just tell us what are the main goals and mission of the Dad Edge?
Yeah, so we help men in 5 areas for fatherhood, manhood, and marriage. So number 1 is creating an extraordinary marriage through elevated communication, connection, intimacy, all of these things. Like, how do you be a good husband, right? Scary statistics, only 3% of marriages can say, I am over the moon from my spouse. Like, I'm crazy about him, right? 3%.
3%. Wow.
Yeah. 12% can say, I'm happy. I'm really happy. I'm not going anywhere. I'm happy. Like, I'm not cloud 9, but I'm happy. Right. So that's 15% of marriages. 85% of marriages, these are the people that stay together. Okay. Not the 50% that get divorced. We won't even talk about that one because that's just common knowledge. 1 out of 2 people that walk down the aisle won't be together. But 85% of people that stay together are in a camp where they're somewhat settled, or completely and totally unhappy, or completely emotionally, physically disconnected. 85%. Those numbers tell you something, right? Those numbers tell you something, that people don't have the education for that, right? For marriage. But if people simply just learn, there's something that's really magical about that 3%. If you really dive into the data and what they do, they grow together, they learn together, they evolve together. They constantly challenge the status quo in their relationship in a good way, right? They don't get complacent, they don't get lazy, they constantly learn, grow, and evolve together, right? And that's what keeps them fulfilled and happy. They keep learning. So marriage is one, fatherhood is another. So parenting, right? So we teach men how to connect with their kids, how to communicate with their kids, how to be playful with their kids, like how to create a bond. Like, I'll be very honest with you, my 18-year-old, like, I want to create a bond with my kids. And I can say that with all confidence, that I've had conversations with my kids. I've created, and we help men do the same. I've created environments of psychological safety where my kids will literally tell us everything. Like, literally, like, sometimes they'll tell me stuff and I'm like, I would have never said that to my mom growing up, or any of these guys. Like, just some of the, and I for the privacy of my kids, I'm not going to share, but like, just, and I'll tell you, like, 2 weeks ago, I became my 18-year-old's 3 a.m. call. And I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I became his 3 a.m. call. And that's the whole thing. It's like, I always told him, I was like, you get into a bind, you call me. I'm your guy. I'm never going to guilt you. I'm never going to shame you. I'm never going to punish you. We'll have a conversation around whatever happened. But just know that I'm going to love you more when you call me. And I'm going to get right up and I'm going to say, I'm going to be there. I'll be right there. So creating environments of psychological safety, connection, communication, being a more patient, resilient father, the dad that when you're on your deathbed, you're like, I left nothing on the table with my kids, nothing. Like, I did life with them. I had conversations with them. My kids knew their dad and I knew them. So that's fatherhood. The other one is health, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. If you look at any guy, what we do as soon as we get married and start having kids, boom, that one goes on the back burner. And what I will tell you is, if you are not keeping your physical body healthy, your mind healthy, your emotional IQ high, you are leaving so much on the table, because your health, and I'm not talking about having a 6-pack. I'm talking about having a healthy mind, healthy body. right? You're leaving so much on the table because you were able to serve at so much of a higher level if you're doing that, right? Fourth one is finances. 50% of divorces are financially related. So we help our guys with a financial mindset as leading their families and how to do that and what that looks like. And then the last one is leadership. And we start with ourselves, right? Lead ourselves, we lead in our marriage, we lead our kids, right? And we do that in a way that's not domineering or overpowering or it's my way or the highway. We do that where we actually empower the people in our family by leading them, right? So those are the 5 things that we help guys with in the group.
I love that. I love that. And I'd say there's a common theme running through there, which I'd encapsulate as continual growth and empowerment. And I think it's so interesting. Like we're so on the same page, and it kind of always upsets me when I talk to people, and they're like, "Oh, well, my life just isn't that great at the moment." And I'm like, "Well, what are you doing exercise right? Nothing. Oh, what are you eating at the moment? Oh, just whatever. Are you doing anything to like boost your mindset? No, not really." And you're like, oh, I think people forget that life is not a passive practice; it's an active practice. You get out of it what you put into it. So it's great to hear all that. One thing you touched on there was children arriving. I'm really curious about what advice you have for guys that are married and then obviously children come into the relationship. And that puts a big pressure on their kind of time resources, I guess. But also, where's that love, focus, and attention go? How do you manage that when the relationship goes from 2 people to 3, 4, maybe even more?
Yeah. And what I'll share might be really controversial to some. I've put this out on social media before. And some people fight it and that's okay. And some people agree to it and that's fine too. But what I'll tell you is I've been doing this. And by the way, like, these are my theories, and you may not agree with them and that's okay. But I've seen them work and I've seen them work really, really well. So in our relationship, it's God, my wife, my kids. So, when it comes to my family, my wife is the first priority. So, and there's a reason behind that, right? My wife and I will be married 21 years tomorrow. So tomorrow's our 20. Thank you.
Congrats. Happy anniversary.
Thank you. And I'll tell you, our marriage is amazing. We're in that 3%. But I can say that because for the first 10 years of our relationship, we were in the 85%. No doubt about it. I'm shocked we actually made it. If I wouldn't have started doing this work, we wouldn't have made it. I'd have 2 kids, not 4. I'd be divorced, maybe on my second or third marriage. I'm not even kidding. So I really, my wife and I both prioritize our marriage because we view ourselves as the foundation of the house, of the family. If we break, the house breaks, right? I mean, it's great to have a great relationship with all 4 of our kids, which we do, but we can't put our relationship on the back burner. And here's what I'll tell you. A lot of people are like, it's so selfish to put your marriage first. Like I've heard that. And I'm like, is it? Or is it the most giving thing that you can possibly do? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, think about it this way. Where do children learn how to have functional relationships? They're either going to learn it going through therapy, right? Or horrible things in their own relationships because it's trial and error and mistakes and all this other stuff because they watch their parents survive and muscle their way through it, or maybe they're not even together anymore. My wife and I view our marriage as a 3D walking, talking example of what it means to radically love each other, right? And to work as a team, right? And to be affectionate and to be loving and to be respectful and appreciative. And when conflicts arise, which they do, my kids get to watch us go through conflict resolution. They get to watch their mom and dad compromise. There was actually one time, luckily my wife and I hardly ever argue. But there was one time where we were arguing and not arguing as like yelling at each other, but my son walked by, my oldest son at the time. I think he was like 14 at the time. It was like 4 years ago. He walked by. He's like, are you guys arguing? I was like, we're disagreeing. And he goes, are you guys going to get divorced? And we're like, we just laughed. I was like, divorce. I was like, when do you ever see us fight? And he's like, well, never. That's why I'm asking. I'm like, well, right. I was like, you know what? Have a seat. And I looked at my wife. I was like, can he watch us? Like, watch us go through a compromise, watch us go through conflict resolution. So he can, and she's like, of course. He sat down. Within 15 minutes, we had it resolved. And I looked at my son and I go, what did you notice? And he's like, wow. He's like, that was really cool. I was like, well, what did you notice? He goes, yeah. I said, what didn't happen? He goes, well, no one yelled. I was like, yeah, no one yelled. What else? He's like, well, no one hit each other. I was like, of course not. And he's like, no one called each other names. I was like, yeah. And he goes, I was like, what did you notice? He goes, well, I noticed you guys spoke to each other in calm words. And when one person spoke, the other person listened. I was like, yeah, yeah. I was like, what'd you notice about the end of it? He's like, I don't know. I was like, did you notice that each person had to give a little? He's like, yeah. I was like, that's conflict resolution. No one has to argue. No one has to fight, scream, hit like you do with your brothers. You can actually talk it out. And I told him, I was like, when you have a girlfriend, remember, you can talk it out. You don't have to yell and scream. You don't have to be disrespectful. In fact, the more you can do stuff like this, the better. So we prioritize our relationship because we want our boys to see what a functional relationship actually looks like. So when they go out and have these relationships, that's where the bar is set. Like I've been watching this my whole life. And if this girl's acting like this or doing this, that doesn't align with what I've been seeing. So I don't know if I want that. And I've seen that in my older boys, like where they'll date somebody and be like, no, nope, not for me. So I think it's really important that we're married first, we're parents second. I'm talking like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction second, right? I'm not talking like, yeah, I know you have a broken arm, but me and mom have a date night. I'm not talking about that.
You dropped so many truth bombs there, and I'm going to try and remember them all as we come back. But I love what you're saying because this is something that I hear all the time when I'm talking to people, and they're like, "I just don't have the time to prioritize myself. I have to look after the kids," and they're putting their own needs second or third all the time. And they're like, "Oh, it'd be selfish if I did what," and I'm like, "Hold on a minute. Don't forget, you're modeling for those around you. You're modeling to your partner. You're modeling for your children. Like, what message? If they see you always giving way to everything else in your life, putting other people first and never getting what you want, what kind of message are you sending to them about how they should live their lives is the first thing. So I love what you said there about prioritizing yourself and your relationship with your wife. I think that's amazing. I think the other truth bomb was the communication style. And I think this is so overlooked in relationships. Um, Again, just my view, I think as time goes by, people can become complacent and they forget, a relationship is like without children, let's say, it's still there's still three parties, right? There's you, there's your wife, and there's a relationship itself. And you have to invest and work in that. And it's about having those open conversations and being honest how you feel without getting to say raising voices, like everything you're saying. So I just love so many great things. And then the last bit was there, you mentioned God, and I think this is so lacking from people in the modern world for so many people is any kind of like spiritual guidance or believing. I think with the world of science, we've perhaps lost or forgotten some of that. But bringing that back into your life, having that trusting in that power higher than yourself, I think actually brings you a kind of calmness that God's got your back, essentially. And it's kind of like a superpower you can call on. Anyway, those are just my truth bombs. I don't know what you had any thoughts on those.
Yeah. So I just wrote a book on this. It was released the end of May. And so it's out now. It's called The Spirit of Fatherhood.
Mm.
But it talks exactly about that, about, having, some sort of creator in your life. Like I know a lot of people don't believe. I mean, we are a faith-based,
Mhm.
family. Like we believe in God, and our faith as a family is very, very strong. And we rely on that a lot, for our foundation. And it's super powerful. In my personal opinion, it's really, really powerful to have that. I agree with you 100%. And I also know that there's other people out there that don't believe in that. And that's okay. I mean, that's their belief. I wish more for them, but I also understand that, that's not everybody's belief. I do think it's important though, for people to believe in something that is beyond what they can imagine, right? They believe in a creator. They believe in a higher power, whatever you want to call it. They believe in spirituality in some way, shape, or form. Um, for me, and maybe this might resonate with some people, and maybe it might turn some people off, but I never had a father growing up. I didn't. but I realized I had a heavenly father that always had my back, that was always there for me. And I still to this day, like, I'm a huge fan of The Chosen.
I
And I
love
think
The
the reason,
Chosen. We just discovered it like a
oh,
couple of weeks and we blitzed through it. Can't wait for the next season, although it's not going to be a happy one, but
I know it's so good. But like, I think Jonathan Romy like plays that part so well, like so well. And that is such a tall order to play Jesus, right? And I look at the apostles, and I was raised with faith my whole life, but I never understood it, and I never really had a relationship with Christ until about 4 years ago, as deep as it is now. And the thing that I love about that portrayal of Jesus is the humanity that he had, right? The leadership the leader that he is, right? And the cool thing about it too is I love how the apostles are portrayed. I mean, they have no clue what the heck is going on. They're just like following because they believe that he's the Messiah, but they're all of them are like, do you know what's going on? No, I don't. Should we keep following him? Yeah, we should. Okay, cool. I still don't know where this is leading and what we're doing, but I know that this is the right thing, right? So, but I do believe that, when it comes to tragedy and when it comes to obstacles and adversity and even really tough lessons. I mean, I went through a season of spiritual warfare writing that book. It was very hard. But I'll tell you, the thing that got me through it was my belief, in that. And I went through pretty horrific times like writing that book. But the whole time that I was writing that book, I was like, if this book costs me everything, I'm writing it and I'm publishing it. Period. And I did. And it's actually done, like I was terrified to put that out in the world a little bit, but it's done extremely well. And we've got so many positive reviews on the book. And I'm like, whew, okay, cool.
oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Can you share what are some of the common challenges that you see when men come to you when they join your community? What are some of the common challenges? And I guess following on from that, what advice would you give to fathers that might be like listening to this, but they're struggling to be the best dad they can be at the moment?
So I mean, I'm blessed, right? I get emails every day, whether it's a DM or whether it's an email or something like that, where a guy is searching, for something, right? Or he sees our content and it resonates with him. And what I can tell you is the common themes that I see all the time is like, I would say one of the biggest tips of the spear of why men come into the dad edge, even though it's the dad edge, it's because they really want to elevate their relationship with their wife. And I will tell you, we do that really, really, really well. And we do it well because I think it's probably one of my favorite things to teach. I just love, so like when I ask a guy, like, well, what is it about your marriage that needs help? It's always communication, always. Right. And I think that really breaks the stereotypical mold because I think a lot of guys are stereotyped into like they only want sex. And yeah, sex is important to a man and a woman. But if you really boil it down, what a guy really wants is he actually really wants a connection with his wife, like outside the bedroom. And he just doesn't know how to communicate, or they feel like they're spinning in different orbits with communication. And that is true. And that's because men and women, we communicate differently. We just do. And when we try to communicate the exact same way, it falls really, really flat. We even have three different needs, as it comes to relationships. Women need to feel in a relationship seen, heard, and safe. Men need to feel appreciated, respected, validated. And the good news about coming into like our ecosystem is we teach you how to make your wife feel seen, heard, and safe. And we teach you how to communicate. So that's one of the biggest battles right there. Once a guy learns how to connect with his wife to become the most attractive version of himself, to talk to her the way she needs to be talked with, right? Not to. And then also being able to communicate our needs and our wants and our desires, right? In a very clear way that's confident. So like there's the communication and connection piece that I see men. That's like the tip of the spear of why they enter into the ecosystem. When it comes to parenting, it usually always revolves around patience or connection. Nothing will test a man's patience more than his kids. And here's the cool thing about patience. Patience is actually the exact same thing as being emotionally regulated and emotionally resilient. It's just packaged up in different and packaged up differently and marketed different into patients. But it really boils down to if you can be more emotionally resilient and have a higher emotional IQ, you'll be more patient. And the other thing too is learning these skills around discipline and connection and communication and leading and guiding. And when you know what to do next, when you have the skills of knowing what to do next with your kids, you will be more patient. Because I heard one of our coaches in the group say this, and he's got a PhD in this stuff. His name is Dr. Nick Sotelo. He nailed it perfectly. He's like, when we lose our patience as a father, it's because we actually don't know the right next thing to do. So we actually just lose our shit. We just yell, right? Or we say something we don't mean. But when we know what to do, we're calmer. Like, think about that. It's in any part of our life. If you know the right next thing in your job, or if you're taking jujitsu and you're in a tournament and you get put into a hold and you know how to get out of it, you're going to be more calm, right? You're not going to freak out. So that patience is a big one.
Patient. Love that. This has been just so illuminating and inspiring, Larry. Thank you so much. I know people are going to want to know how to learn more about it. So how can people contact you, learn more about the Dad Edge?
Best way is, I mean, if you know, the podcast will definitely keep you busy for quite some time. We've got, I think, 1,208 episodes published now to date. Everything on social media can be found at thedadedge.com and at the Dad Edge on Instagram, and you can find our page, the Dad Edge, on Facebook as well. I put out content every single day on those channels, you know, making sure we're giving, you know, some of our best things away. And then if you want more, if you want to become, instead of a content consumer, and you want to become what we call an executor and a better leader, husband and father, you can check out what we do in the tribe. You can go to thedadedge.com/mastermind. We've got 2 different programs. One's called the Alliance and one's called the Boardroom. The Boardroom is for business owners only. You have to own a business in order to be in that group. And the other one is you don't have to own a business. You can just be a career guy, but that's the Alliance.
Cool. Larry, we'll put all of that in the show notes so people can get the links easily. Thank you so much for your time and being on here. It's been really inspiring and awesome to speak to you.
Back at you, my friend. This was really fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. You've been listening to the Midlife Mentors with Claire and James Davis.
We'd love to hear from you. So drop us a line at info@themidlifementors.com with any questions or topic suggestions.
And make sure you join us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can find us under the Midlife Mentors. Yeah. What? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. And don't forget to take the Midlife Reset Audit now to receive personalised insights into what's holding you back from living your healthiest, happiest midlife. So go ahead and take the audit now at themidlifementors.com/audit.